Okay, well, we'll do our best. Yes. For your attention, we don't have the microphone and some other things. And but let me. My name is Dr. Harold Isaacs. I'm Professor Emeritus of History here at the university, and I started this series in 1981. And so, as the brochure says, this is the 33rd anniversary. So that sort of dates me. You know, figure out I got here in 1965, so, you know, I'm not a young man anymore. But anyhow, we want to keep this series going because it's so important. The third world affects the third world, and it affects the so-called first world. And I want to thank the speakers first for showing up, Dr. Tom Leonard and Bill Head, making the trip here. And I also want to recognize some people in the audience. Right in the front here is Kathy and Paul Zach. Kathy Zach is the production person for the Journal of Third World Studies, which comes out of the university, which I edit. And Paul's retired. He used to work with President Carter and Secret Service. We have back there Miss Randy Head, Bill's wife, is back in the corner. Glad she could come down with Bill. Make sure he behaves. Oh. And there's Jason Bergman, who's in our History and Political Science Department and an authority on Jimmy Carter, actually. Wrote a dissertation on President Carter, and LeVar Smith, who's writing his dissertation now, comparing Zimbabwe with Ghana. And so welcome, LeVar. And then Gary Klein, who's head of the History Department and Political Science Department, and a former treasurer and president of the Association of Third World Studies, which I founded here in 1983, so that's another anniversary. In fact, I was thinking it's the first time in a long time we've had 4 presidents in one room, you, me, Bill, and Tom, presidents of ATWS. So anyhow, and then right back there is Dr. Philip Smedra, our Director of Study Abroad Program and a frequent participant in the Third World Series. And Phil is Secretary of Association of Third World Studies. And come around here, Dr. Tu, biologist, here in the front, and Dr. Hall, who's our historian, European historian in the front. And but I want to welcome, I just named off the faculty, but I want to welcome everybody, and especially the students. I think this is a good experience to hear 2 well-known authorities on Central America, on the Third World. And between them, they have almost 40 books published. And congratulations on that. And Bill Head just had a book published, Texas A&M Press, Night Hunters, about the C-130. So I also want to thank Jessica King, who's taping this from our technology department. Thank you, Jessica. And you know, I'm glad we have this program. I was talking to Tom Leonard because our attention's been so riveted on the Middle East and South Asia and now Ukraine, and to have something on Latin America especially U.S. relations with Latin America, which has sort of been ignored really since 9/11. Even though President Bush was going to, before 9/11, was going to give it attention because he was from Texas and was familiar with it. But tonight we're going to have a program on U.S. Panamanian relations from President Carter. It's going to be the first presentation by Tom Leonard to George H.W. Bush number one. And so that ought to be very interesting. And then Dr. Head is going to talk about the U.S. invasion of Panama in 1989. Well, Tom and I have something in common. We're both Latin American historians. We're also both originally from New Jersey. And you were from Elizabeth, weren't you? Yeah, Elizabeth, New Jersey. I was from West Orange.
He was on the good side of the track.
Yeah, I don't know about that. But anyhow, don't forget I was born in Newark.
I was born in Elizabeth.
Yeah,
Didn't see trees on the mountain.
my sister lives in Elizabeth and didn't see trees. I know something about that, having lived in the Bronx. Anyhow, Tom is retired, distinguished professor of history at University of North Florida. He went to Mount St. Mary's University in Maryland and to get his undergraduate degree, and then he got his MA from Georgetown and PhD from American University. He's got about 15 books published on U.S. Latin American relations, including on U.S. Panamanian relations and the canal, and also U.S. Cuban relations. And he's got a biography of Fidel Castro and a book on Castro and the Cuban Revolution, and several books on U.S. Central American relations. And something I left out of the brochure, I shouldn't have, is he edited an Encyclopedia of the Developing World, which was 4 volumes. And he was president of the Association of Third World Studies in 1999-2000. And he organized the first meeting of the Association of Third World Studies that we had out of this country in Costa Rica. And I remember that well because he did so much preparation for it. He visited San Jose twice, and then he came up here, and we had Bill and a bunch of other people had a sort of a mini pre-conference here, so to make sure everything was all right. And he was also director of the International Studies program at University of North Florida. Well, I'm going to let him take it from there. He's going to talk about the U.S. and Panama from President Jimmy Carter to President Herbert Walker Bush. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Leonard to the university.
Harold, thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be back here in Americus, Georgia, away from the urbanized center of the world, if you wish, for the Southeast Georgia. You know, we often refer to Jacksonville as the capital of Southeast Georgia because it is the largest city along the coast for that area of the United States. And it's a pleasure to be here with Bill Head, and who we've known each other for quite a while now. And I'm glad that all of you are here, and I hope that I don't bore you I should forewarn you, and Bill doesn't know this yet, but Harold in his last email said something like, didn't he, Bill, something like we had 35 minutes each?
Yeah.
And 20 minutes? Well, you know about giving a historian first crack. So I decided I was going to take the first 80 minutes. You could take the next 5. Last 5 are for questions. If you're awake and you're interested, direct them to Bill. Okay? I want to say anything other than that. Now, but as a historian, I also would like to go back just a little bit to establish a couple of key points. No, I won't go to 1513 when King Alfonso first suggested that a waterway be built across the Isthmus of Panama. But I will make some generalizations about Panama and its long history. There are 3 themes that have dominated the history of Panama that are important for when you come to the 1977 treaties with Jimmy Carter and Omar Torrijos. The first one is that Panama has long been dominated by external influences, long, even in its pre-Columbian times. But in its Columbian times, we know it was the Spanish. In the 19th century, from 1821 until November 3, 1903, it was Colombia. And after 1903, depending on which Panamanian you may talk to, it was the United States. And there are many in the United States would make the same comment. And it all dealt with this canal. That was all important to everybody. Secondly, the theme that emerges from the colonial experience is if you could think of a pyramid and how you would structure society, you know at the apex of every society there's an elite class. And even in Panama in its colonial days, shortly after 1530, when Spain realized what she really had, and she began to organize this society, there was always at the apex this elite. They may be administrators from Spain who would leave in 1821 if they didn't stay, but most of them left. Or there would be cattle growers or other farming pursuits, agricultural pursuits in and around Panama and Veragua. Or they would be hooked on to the commercial interest in the Camino Real, the highway that went from Colón to what you now know as Panama City. They were the dominant force. There was what most of us will come to call a middle, or Latin American is called, a middle sector. Not particularly a middle class, but a middle sector. If we were defining that middle sector, all right, we've got the elite, but all of us would be in that middle sector. We may, some of us would be separated by wealth, by salaries, by income, by professions. But we had something in common. That elite will not let us into the system, into the political system. This will be a carryover from colonial days and will be in Panama as we go through to 1930, as we'll see in a minute. So this political structure is another thing that will again come out later when we talk about leading to the invasion in 1989 that Bill will most well describe for us. And finally, Panama has a long history of discrimination, as did in all Spanish America, the Indians, the Native Americans, the Amerindians, whatever term you care to use, were non-citizens. They were to be worked. They were to be used. And as elsewhere in Latin America, these groups, as in Panama, ran off into the jungle. If you ever go to Panama, one of the most exciting things to see are some of these archaeological sites that predate the arrival of Christopher Columbus, how well organized these societies really were. But it's more than just the Native Americans. As you know, the Spanish, after a while, practiced slavery. But in Panama, it usually was associated with the shipping across the Camino Real, or house servants, or special skills, or something like that, artisans, much as in the United States. then there were, and these people would eventually be known as the Afro Panamanians today, because they adopted the Spanish language, the Spanish religion, and Spanish practices. The other group, the West Indians, West Indian African Americans, or Afro-West Indians, as they're often referred to in Panama. They came first with the building of the railroad in 1846 to 48 to 50, rather, 1848 to 50. They came with Ferdinand de Lesseps in 1881 to help him attempt to build the Trans-Isthmian Canal. And they came in full force. Some say 17,000, some say closer to 30,000 came. No records were really kept. Many did return after the canal opened because there were no opportunities for them, largely due to discrimination. But they returned. Now, these three themes, the dominance by Colombia in the 19th century also meant that politically all the authority was in Bogota. As it was colonially, it was in Spain, in Madrid. And if you are a good Panamanian, you'll say as it was in Washington. I've been in some Latin American countries. When you say you want a program, you want to do something, the first thing you do is you go to the AID office and ask them if it can be funded. And if it can be funded, then you see the ambassador and it gets funded. Well, that cliche applies to Panama in many, many ways because of this canal. So when we begin our story in 1903, when Panama achieves its independence, one of the things that we should keep in mind is that there's a carryover from all of this. So if you visualize that pyramid and take Panamanian politics from 1903 to 1931, every one of the presidents, although labeled a liberal, with the exception of two who were, quote, conservative, they all represented the elite class. What emerged also during the construction period and then blossomed after the construction period in the 1920s in this middle sector were small businessmen and merchants who serviced both the Panamanians, the American forces, and the American personnel within the zone. And they're looking around saying, hey, and some were doctors, some were dentists, some were university professors, small shopkeepers, again, those skilled artisans. Oh. They came together in the 1920s to form a group called Acción Comunal. What it was really a representative of this middle sector saying, hey, this closed political system, we want into it. They also said, our small businesses are being stifled by the terms of the 1903 treaty, which gave the commissary operation within the zone free rein to service the ships, service the workers. A lot of graft and corruption went on back and forth between Panamanian laborers in the zone and outside the zone. And we're getting cheated, we're getting shortchanged. And the Panamanian middle sector wanted this corrected, and there was an effort at it in 1926 in the treaty, but something else was apparent in 1926. The nationalistic response to that proposed Kellogg-Alfaro Treaty. We didn't get sovereignty. We didn't get what we wanted. And when it was leaked to the press in December of 26, when the National Assembly met in January, that was the end of the treaty. They never considered it. Nationalism was on the rise. They did get some of those things in 1936. There's an added feature to this nationalism that comes out in the middle 1930s. It's the founding of the University of Panama. Oh my God, the last thing you ever want to do is educate people because they're going to ask questions. And once they begin to ask questions, man, the old elite's got a problem. How do you justify your existence? At us at the well, doing all the work. And this group grew. And the best example of that middle sector nationalism challenging elitism came at the end of World War II, when the Panamanian National Assembly, or Congress as some people call it, refused to even consider the ratification of a treaty, the proposed treaty of 1947, that would call for an extension of the United States use of and occupation of Rio Hato Air Base and several smaller installations around the country. That relates to 1941, when the United States, for defense purposes, signed a treaty with Panama, as it did with several other Latin American countries, to take control for the duration of the war, certain sites considered essential for the defense, in this case of the canal. If you look at a map of Brazil, and you look up at the top where San Salvador is, just above that is a little town known as Bahia. Bill knows about this, I'm sure. There's a huge naval or Army Air Force base there. Why? Because as you're approaching the war, the thought was in the military mind, Germans are going to come across North Africa, leap to the hump of Brazil, and man, they're at the Panama Canal and Venezuelan oil. We got to defend against that. Well, that was the rationale behind these agreements with Panama, or this agreement with Panama for these several sites. But it also said within a year after the war was over, the United States would return them to Panama. Well, the military had some other ideas. They wanted to keep these, and the Panamanians weren't about to do it. Finally, something was negotiated whereby the Americans would keep Rio Hato for another 10 years, or 8 years really, to get out in 55, I think. But all the other bases were returned to Panama. There was another, as we mentioned, the University of Panama and the people who were coming out of there. A new political group has emerged after World War II. Several different small political parties, from a small communist party to a socialist party to a Christian democratic party, you name it, there were several of them. And they vied for office for the seats in the National Assembly and for the president. I think between 1947 and 1952, Panama had 7 presidents. Indicates the political instability in the country. What was inherent in all of those parties was this nationalism. Well, what does this nationalism want? Well, let's step back to 1931. Middle class, yes, did pull off, they call a revolution. Yes, provided for the election of Armadio Arias, who was succeeded by another individual, but his brother, Arnulfo, becomes president in 1940. Has a constitution, directs how it's going to be written. And here your discrimination against the West Indians, not so much the Panamanian blacks, but particularly the West Indians. He even wanted them out of the country. Oh, okay. The canal was responsible for this. You Americans brought this black community to us. We don't want it. You take it out of here. Well, Arnulfo had other problems, and he was overthrown in a year, but what it tells us is that seeping underneath, unbeknownst to almost all of the observers, I've read the diplomatic correspondence, and very little about it. The Afro Panamanian community and the West Indian community, the ferment within them, the discrimination against them by us in the zone, all the things that you've learned about discrimination in the South were applied to blacks in the zone. Separate schools, separate housing, and all that stuff. Oh. So now in 1952, Colonel Jose Ramon takes over the presidency. Legitimately elected. He was the founder of the National Guard in 1933. He got US aid during the war to make this a very efficient force. He became the arbiter of presidents from 47 to 52 and said, I guess, what the hell, I might as well be president now, right? So he becomes president. But he wasn't really a dictator. But he did negotiate a treaty with the United States that bears his name and Dwight Eisenhower. Among other things, that treaty finally provided for the merchants, the smaller merchants in Panama, to freely access the zone, in quotes, do that, to service the ships. It sounds like they got everything they wanted. No. They still had an argument to make. You see, the commissary, like any military commissary, prices are cheaper. And in Panama, part of the reasons that they're cheaper is that the goods were shipped down on naval ships that made their normal runs to Panama. So there was no shipping costs involved. For those in Panama, many of them were Asian, by the way, had migrated from Asia, they're paying import duties into Panama. They're paying shipping charges, so their prices are higher. Yeah, we got access to the zone. We can sell to the Americans. We can sell to the ships. but just by transportation alone. Commissary prices were cheaper. That also said in that, or also was defined in that treaty, that the Panamanians would have the right to fly their national flag at certain sites throughout the zone. Oh. Now all of this comes together in 1964. In the flag riots that began on January 9th. I remember being in graduate school the night they broke out. The instructor we had, his name was John Finan, who had been an ambassador in Colombia. Well, the next couple of weeks were real interesting because we brought Panamanians in, and we just sat around and we talked about Panama. A very interesting experience. But those protests illustrated this nationalism. The Panamanians placed responsibility for their problems upon the United States. The elite was only interested in gaining more sovereign control over the canal zone or jobs for themselves. Take a look at, study the treaties. Read Mike Conniff's book on Panama and the United States. You see it very clearly. What they wanted was control over lands, the distribution of lands outside the zone for canal use, for drainage or whatever. They would determine the prices. They wanted the right to control radio signals out of the zone, not the American military. It meant the American military controlled all radios in Panama. They were interested in those things. The middle sector was concerned with the businessmen, as we mentioned, their interest. The young college graduates are now looking for jobs in the zone. There's no jobs in Panama. Still an underdeveloped society. It is today outside of Panama City, outside of Cologne and the free trade zone, in many ways. So, this seizing nationalism, you're the cause of our problems. West Indians are awakened. Read George Westerman, one of those West Indian journalists, wrote a newspaper. You brought your system here. You correct it here. Everybody has a complaint. The Indians, the Kunas, the Wanuns, scattered throughout the country, they were outside the system. They just wanted to be left alone. The black Panamanian, or the Afro Panamanian, he's saying, well, if you're going to correct the West Indians, you're going to correct my problems too. Discrimination, job-wise, pay-wise, school-wise, housing, and all of this. Well, the 1964 riots taught us one thing. Really taught Lyndon Johnson and his group an important lesson. It was time to change the treaty. It was time to change the treaty. If you know Latin America in general, what happened in Panama, those riots on January 9, 10, and 11, was sort of typical of the protests that were going on about Latin America. Those of us who were in school at the time, we called them social revolutions. Those who were left out want in. Whether it's the middle sector wants politics or the poorer classes want doctors or housing or sanitation. Of course, Fidel Castro lit the candle, didn't he? Oh, so now Panama is sort of a microcosm of what's a bigger picture across the continent. Well, in Lyndon Johnson and the Panamanian government, the Roberto Chiari at the time, negotiate a new treaty, or their minions do. But neither of them will submit the treaties for approval. Lyndon Johnson says, and remember in February 1968, I'm not running again, I'm done. So nobody wants to consider treaties when you're going to deal with a president, a real lame duck, right, because of Vietnam. And then in Panama, there was this problem that emerged in October 1968. Well, it started in May with the election of Arnulfo Arias, the old nationalist who rewrote the Constitution in 1940 and discriminated and made it clear the West Indians were a problem. And yes, we should own the canal. Well, hell, everybody in Panama is saying that now. It is responsible for all of our problems. Oh. Well, Arnulfo won the presidential election. He took office on October 1, 1968, and the military deposed him on October 11. Out of it emerged one Omar Torrijos, who 3 years later, or 4 years later, 1972, directs the rewriting of the Constitution that names him maximum leader. he restructures the voting for the one-house national legislature so that his kind of people are guaranteed seats. They will control it. He's the final arbiter of all disputes. He controls the military with the appointment of officers. But he does attempt to reach everybody, even the poor in the rural areas. He has a land program, redistribution program. If I'm an elite and I'm backing my taxes, the government will seize the property, just as they do here, and then would resell it for 1/10 of the price to some peasant who has 20 years to pay for it. He may not even live that long, but he's got a stake in the system. And some 12,000 Panamanian peasants took advantage of that. He did much with construction in Panama City and Cologne for the urban poor, began housing programs. But still, you got some people, that middle sector. This is still a dictatorship. A benevolent one, maybe, but it's a dictatorship. Political opposition is not tolerated. Now, it's pretty clear that Omar Torrijos wanted to be president again, that he wanted to run for office. He mysteriously died in a plane crash in 1980. Everybody from the CIA to Manuel Noriega has been blamed for it, but unless, Bill, you know something I don't, nobody knows yet exactly what happened, how that plane went down. Sounds like 370 to me. But anyway, he dies. And Manuel Noriega seizes power. Now, he runs a brutal dictatorship. He suppresses the opposition with prison, beatings, jail. There are no civil rights. Newspapers are censored, radios are censored, television is censored. He named presidents. One of them I had the fortune to meet one time. His name was Nicholas Barletta, was at the World Bank, and he sat opposite me, like these tables are here, at a luncheon. And I said something, I said, well, how's your albatross coming along? Meaning the canal, because there was so much of the maintenance of the canal was hidden in other budgets in the United States. Corps of Engineers, Navy, Army, all the tolls didn't pay for everything. So I said, how's your albatross coming along? So I asked what I meant, and I told him. Oh. And I say for 6, 7 years maybe. After that, we exchanged Christmas cards. And he said, yeah, we got our albatross all right. We got to figure out what we're going to do about it. What it would mean is upping tolls so they could help pay for those dredgings and for making sure all the seepage from the mountains on the side don't come down and seep into the waterway. Anyway, he named presidents. He also is taking stronger stands against the United States. Why? Was it because he helped ship arms to the Contras in Nicaragua during that revolutionary period in the 1980s, early 1980s in particular, in the 1970s? The military in Panama did a lot for it. Is that what it was? Into El Salvador, too? Is that what it was? He was confident the CIA would protect them? Or we wouldn't want that to come out publicly so he could taunt the Americans? And he did. He did a very good job at it. Was it because the Panamanian economy had slid backwards? As he upped his rhetoric, Ronald Reagan, as president, cut off the financial aid. Just cut it off. That made things worse. Of course, the hope is that if the people are hungry enough, they'll rise up against Noriega. It's going to be hard to do in a dictatorship like he ran, but that was the hope. Oh, okay. In fact, the final straw in the ballot, or in the box, came with the May 1989 elections. President Carter had an observation team there. And President Carter witnessed much of what happened. Exit polls and the president's own group of people predicted that the opposition candidate, that was a conglomeration, the opposition was a conglomeration of the elite who had their own objectives. The middle sector that had its own objectives. Leave the Afro Panamanian and the West Indian out of this, they're just not sure what's going to happen. The Indians, no. They're looking for what are called comarcas, self-governing pieces of land. They get them after Bill gets over the invasion. They want to stay out of Panamanian society. Well, was it that? And the fear, if you take note, come 1989, or 1990 rather, a Panamanian would take control of the newly formed Panama Canal Authority. He and Panamanian, other delegates to the authority, would be the majority. The U.S. would be the minority. And you got a guy like Noriega in charge? Military's got kind of upset about that. So is the transportation industry. The largest shipping unit, if you wish, largest single unit of shipping that goes through the canal is from the U.S. East Coast to West Coast and vice versa. All the foreigners are second, a distant second. Oh my God, it threatens American shipping. It threatens potentially it threatens the canal and security. But when the elections take place in May, and the polls, the exit polls and the opinion polls and whatever else have you, comes out and says that Balladares, Balladares, is going to win this election. The Electoral Board will have to declare them the winner. He and Billy Ford as vice president, Guillermo. Now, Noriega just cancels the whole thing, says, well, I'll have another election later. And caught on television and broadcast all over the world were the physical beatings in public of both Andera and Vice President candidate Ford by the so-called Doberman, sort of a private little police force. Reminds you of the mafia, right? And it's caught on television. So now you've got a lot of charges against Noriega. You've got the American concern over, the potential concern over the canal and its use after the Panamanians take control of the authority. You've got the idea that, you know, if he gets away with this, other Latin American countries are going to do the same thing. He also was involved with the drug running via Castro out of Colombia to Panama, which was a banking center. Torrijos set that up. And money was laundered like you do your laundry once a week. And went through Cuba. Is that what you get him for? Oh, well, we're going to restore democracy to Panama. See, these poor Panamanians have been deprived of democracy. May have been bad under Torrijos, but it's really bad under Noriega. So we're going to have to go. And there was a plot that was supposed to put into effect a coup d'etat in late October 1989. Well, you probably know, I know you know more than I do about this, but somehow the communications between our military and the generals that were to pull the coup somehow got malfunctioned. Would that be? We have Castro malfunctions. We could have a malfunction here, I guess. And it didn't happen. And those officers who were involved in the proposed coup all lost their lives. Oh. Now he's swinging, man. He's got us, right? But when that happened in October, and President Bush went to Colin Powell, who was head of the JCS at the time, and said, what happened? And it's explained, well, communications. Leave it at that for a minute, Bill, probably address it. Oh, well, the next time you better be ready because we're going. We got to get rid of them. Democracy, drug running, money laundering, security of the canal, whatever one you want, or combination thereof. So on December 16 and 17, when one American military personnel is shot by the Panamanian Defense Forces, killed, and a husband and wife, naval officer, junior grade naval officer, if I remember correctly, not that it matters, and his wife were picked up by the Panamanian Defense Forces and were harassed while in custody. And Bush was at a party in the White House when that word came through. He called Colin Powell and said, let's go. Bill, it's all yours. Let me get out of the way here.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is, what's about to happen is very dangerous here because,
Let me say something.
oh, okay.
Before I give me the opportunity. I passed around, I started sign-up sheets you know, yellow pads. So I don't know where they are now, but please, we want to get I want to find out my students that are here. And also, we want to get a total count for continuing education and so forth. But let me thank you, Tom, for that excellent presentation. Well, Dr. Head's chief historian at Warner Robins Air Force Base, and he's anxious to start, so I'm got a PhD from Florida State, and he's always got their colors on, and you know what happened, whatever, January 1st. I don't know. He could tell you. But anyhow, he's authored a lot of books and so forth, and he's been here many times. And so please join me in welcoming Dr. Head again.
All righty, let's see if we can get this without. Tom was talking about him. All right, listen, I'm going to read this. I don't like reading, but this way I will keep it to the right time and everything. And I thank Tom for his leading us up to where I'm going to get to. And thank Harold for inviting us here. And it's really nice to come here. I don't know if you guys realize what a jewel you have at Georgia Southwestern out here in the farmlands of Southwestern Georgia. This is an incredible place. And you got some really great professors out here. I know Harold was talking about all of us doing one thing and another, and I know Tom and I have been on panels together, and I've always said that it was more like the usual suspects is what you're getting tonight instead of just some famous professors, etc. All right. During the 1980s, the combination of world events and U.S. policy decisions by both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush led to United States intervention, which was designed in a very real sense to remind the world that while the U.S. had not been able to thwart the communist unification of Vietnam, it was still the most formidable military power in the world, capable of imposing her will whenever and wherever she wanted to. Learning from the mistakes of the 1982 Grenada invasion, congressional leaders led by Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater and Georgia Senator Sam Nunn, they began a process to create something called the United States Special Operations Command. The new program gave SOCOM the authority to modernize weapons and forces and direct inter-service cooperation by having a single commander for special operations. Special Operations Command came none too soon, since in December of 1989, Operation Just Cause began. It was the largest American military action since the Vietnam War, and its origins stemmed from the events in Panama beginning from the time that Tom began and led us forward to 1989. After years of struggling to make quote-unquote democracy work on the small Isthmian, that's a tough one, nation, the elected government was overthrown by Colonel Omar Torrijos Herrera and his notorious henchmen, which were better known, and I got to meet some of these guys, the Guardia Nacional. Torrijos ruled Panama with an iron fist, although one in a glove, if you will, until his death in 1980. And here's the first slide. Torrijos' successor was one of his proteges, well, supposedly, a man named Manuel Antonio Noriega, who almost immediately established his own dictatorship, cleverly hidden behind trappings of a newly, quote-unquote, elected democratic regime. Noriega altered the role of the Guardia, combining it with the Panamanian Army, Navy, and what passed for an Air Force, to create something called the Panamanian Defense Force, or PDF. In reality, elements of the Guardia still acted as Noriega's personal force and maintained a special position within the military and the government. The U.S. was reluctant at first to challenge this rule, since Noriega was providing intelligence to the Central Intelligence Agency about communist activities in El Salvador and Nicaragua. By 1984, relations began to sour, since much of Noriega's intelligence proved to be, for lack of a better term, useless. The CIA also discovered, which discovered is a funny word, that Noriega was working with the Colombian drug lords to traffic drugs into the United States. Initially, American leaders attempted to persuade Noriega to reform his government. But when that failed, they began supporting potential opponents. On June 26, 1987, the United States Senate even went so far as to call for Noriega's ouster if he would not reform the government. Soon after, the U.S. Embassy was attacked by a mob that was later discovered to be mostly Noriega's Dignity Battalion, or Digbats. Later, American GIs would change that from Digbats to Dingbats. In protest, the U.S. cut off aid to Panama. In reaction, Noriega's goon squads, dressed as police and military personnel, began harassing U.S. citizens. Much of the anti-American activity was designed to deflect attention away from the growing opposition to Noriega's regime. In the Panamanian election of May 1988, Guillermo Endara formed an opposition coalition that legally won the election. However, Noriega dissolved the new government by force, while the Digbats increased the harassment of U.S. citizens and Panamanian political opponents. And as Tom pointed out, they even beat up Endara in public. These scenes soon appeared on North American television and in the newspapers. Fearing a Panamanian attack on the Canal Zone, President Reagan sent 2,000 soldiers and Marines to protect U.S. citizens and property. Vice President and Republican presidential candidate in 1988, George H.W. Bush, called on Noriega during the campaign to honor the results of the election. Where's my thing here? There's George. As American military units began moving U.S. citizens from Panama to the Canal Zone and some back to the United States, they also began planning for an invasion. They took the first step by sending additional troops and aircraft to Howard Air Base in the Canal Zone as part of a so-called exercise dubbed Purple Storm. On January 20th, 1989, Bush was sworn in as president, and invasion planning began in earnest, with Lieutenant General Maxwell R. Thurman, commander of Southern Command, selected to lead the invasion. Final planning was headed by Lieutenant General Carl Stenner, 18th Airborne Corps, which was located in Fort Bragg, and it was designated Joint Task Force South. This is a combat map, as a matter of fact. It's somewhat confusing, but it's the Canal Zone. You can see it. The final plan called for a rapid deployment attack by 25,000 men against PDF locations throughout Panama. Initially, they planned on having 12,000 backup forces. Ultimately, the operation was designated, as I've already mentioned, Just Cause. Ground elements included the Atlantic Unit, comprised of 2 brigades of the 7th Infantry Division, the Semper Fi unit, made up of Marines assigned to the job of securing the area around Howard Air Base, the Bayonet unit, composed of the 193rd Infantry Brigade, to secure positions in and around Panama City, especially the PDF headquarters at La Comandancia. And finally, the Pacific unit, comprised of 2 brigades of the 82nd Airborne, to airdrop and follow up an assault by Task Force Red Special Ops Forces designed to secure Torrijos International Airport and Tucumán Military Airfield, where reinforcements and supplies would land. The U.S. had been slow to reduce their military presence in the Canal Zone in anticipation of turning over the Panama Canal operations to the Panamanian government in December 31st, 1989. And as a result, there were still troops, a significant number of American troops located there. On the 3rd of October, 1989, Noriega was, as Tom pointed out, confronted by yet another coup, this one led by a major named Moises Giralde. I hope I said that right. When President Bush failed, this is the communication break, to support the rebels, they were crushed. And many in the media labeled Bush, and this would not be the last time, a quote-unquote wimp for not doing something. But the truth is, he could not act for fear of giving away plans for the invasion. Instead, the president announced that the U.S. would not negotiate with a, quote, known drug runner and warned Noriega to step down immediately or face dire consequences. Since many high-ranking PDF leaders took part in the coup attempt, this led the U.S. leaders to believe that Noriega was beginning to become more vulnerable. They also believed that Congress and the public would support an invasion. On December 15th, 1989, the Joint Chiefs of Staff approved the final attack plan. Coincidentally, the Panamanian legislature declared war against the United States. The next day, 4 U.S. service personnel were stopped by the PDF troops, and as they tried to drive away, the PDF opened fire, wounding 2 and killing Marine Lieutenant Robert Paz. That same day, Navy Lieutenant J.G. and his wife were stopped and detained for several hours, during which they were beaten and threatened with execution. Although they were released, the incident strengthened U.S. resolve. That evening, General Colin Powell and the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff met with Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney and all the service chiefs. Afterward, Powell and Cheney went to the White House to brief the president, and after a very short discussion, Bush declared, "Let's do it." On December the 18th, Stenner left Fort Bragg and traveled to Panama in preparation for the invasion, which was now scheduled for 1 a.m. on December the 20th, 1989. His Joint Task Force South headquarters were located in Fort Clayton. General Thurman located his headquarters at Quarry Heights to literally oversee operations. The last minute, 14,000 more troops were added to the operation. Just Cause eventually involved almost 58,000 American ground forces and 350 aircraft. That same day, amidst the chaotic scene at Pope Air Force Base in North Carolina, C-141s, these are jet transport aircraft, began transporting 82nd Airborne troops to Panama to assault Torrijos Airport and Tucumán Airfield. On the 19th, an ice storm struck the Carolinas. Everyone available pitched in to help with the de-icing and loading process. In spite of the weather, every aircraft departed nearly on schedule. Ultimately, 63 of these C-141s were employed during this phase of the operation. One problem we had, though, was security. Even before the invasion began, Dan Rather of CBS News reported, live television, that, quote, planes were taking off for Fort Bragg to God knows where. American commanders struggled to stay ahead of schedule in order to maintain some kind of secrecy for the operation. The action began with an assault on strategic targets like the civilian Punta Patilla Airport in Panama City, a PDF barracks, and an airstrip at Rio Hato, which Tom already mentioned, near one of Noriega's homes. One of the most intense actions occurred in the central headquarters of the PDF, more commonly known as La Comandancia. The target of this attack was to capture Noriega, but he wasn't there. U.S. ground forces came under heavy fire as they closed in on La Comandancia. They were supported by two AC-130s, which fired several 40 and 105 millimeter rounds into various buildings, which caused them to catch on fire. The result was, you can see, this, by the way, is a camera taken with night vision, so that's why it looks like it does. Soon the fire spread to adjacent buildings, and before long, the entire poorer section of Panama City was aflame. On the first night, and this is what I wrote my book about right here, an 82nd Airborne unit commanded by Captain Steve Hagan was pinned down by enemy fire from a multi-story building in Panama City. Hagan called for air support. An AC-130 radioed back asking for target location. Hagan recalled, quote, we explained our situation, and the guy said, where are you? And we showed him. And he said, where are you? Where are the bad guys? And we showed him that. After a couple seconds, the voice from above said, you guys need to move back about 18 feet. About 2 seconds later, 2 rounds from the Spectre's 105 side-mounted cannon went through the building window with explosive results. Hagan waited for a few seconds before moving his troops, but soon realized that there were no more enemy fire, no more enemy noise, no more enemy anything. He thanked his unseen savior, to which the airman replied, Roger that, glad to be of service. Years later, General Carl Hagan, Captain's father, recounting the story, concluded, now that's what I call close air support. Another early target of U.S., there's my crew. Another early target of U.S. forces was Fort Amador, a vital position located at the Pacific entrance to the canal, where the Bridge of the Americas crosses over the canal. It was also near a large oil farm and a key PDF command and control center. It was also on the left flank of the U.S. attack against La Comandancia. The 508th Airborne Infantry Company took the fort during the early morning hours of December the 20th, 1989. They were supported again by AC-130s that caught many of the enemy literally scurrying across the local golf course. In total panic, most of them stripped off their uniforms and ran through the night nearly naked. Nearby was an American housing area, which the Americans quickly secured to prevent the PDF from using the U.S. civilians as hostages. One fierce engagement occurred at the Pacora River Bridge near the headquarters of Noriega's elite Battalion 2000. As U.S. ground troops began to cross the bridge, they received heavy fire from a very large PDF convoy. The firefight continued into the night, leaving the outnumbered Americans in a very dangerous position. Okay. And once again, it was the AC-130s that came to the rescue. Ground commanders had called the AC-130s in, and as one recalled, they stopped them cold. They finished them off, end quote. At the same time, the largest nighttime airdrop since Normandy, that's saying quite a lot, I might add, was taking place at Torrijos Airport, Tecuman Airfield, and Rio Hato Airfield. Army Rangers and 82nd Airborne units led the attack into a hot LZ. As the assault began, a Brazilian airliner with 376 passengers landed in the midst of the chaos and now provided the PDF with potential civilian hostages. To prevent this, AC-130s and AH-6 attack helicopters were sent to drive the PDF troops away. What the U.S. did not know at the time was that Noriega was actually at Tecuman with one of his many call girls. He escaped that night in his pajamas. And there's Tecuman, and there's the paradrop. That's how they, except it was dark, it was night, okay? Soon 12 C-141s and 4 C-130s, cargo planes, airdropped another wave of Army Rangers, and an hour later, after the first troops secured a perimeter, 28 more C-141s deposited more troops and heavy equipment, including 8 Sheridan tanks. The last waves of cargo arrived about 5:15. At daybreak, the Americans extended their position and seized the airport terminal, rescuing the remainder of those Brazilian passengers that, in order to keep them from being taken hostage. By noon on the 20th, the entire area was under U.S. control and the runways cleared of debris. By 3 p.m., the C-141s were landing the entire 7th Infantry Division, and while some dropped items had been damaged or lost in the surrounding marshes, nearly every item was eventually recovered and repaired. 1 GI was killed and 5 wounded in the battle. In addition, 19 were injured during the low-level night drop, which is a very dangerous thing to do anyway. The enemy lost 13 killed, 20 wounded, and 54 captured. At Rio Hato, 637 Rangers parachuted from 13 C-130s. 2 Special Operations Low-Level 2 C-130s provided electronic warfare and radar jamming support, while 2 other C-130s parachuted heavy equipment into the area. Again, the fixed-wing gunships and the helicopter gunships provided close air support. One of the most interesting aspects of the entire operation was that the United States deployed 2 F-117A stealth fighters, which at the time were cutting-edge technology. And they dropped 2 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs within 200 yards of the PDF barracks, killing a large number of the Panamanian forces and forcing the rest of them to flee for their lives. By December the 21st, the invasion was all but over, except for a small pocket of resistance. To quote Air Force historian Bernie Nolte, most of the defenders preferred to surrender, especially after watching the AC-130's accurate display of firepower. Without the PDF policing Panama, law and order soon began to break down. To prevent chaos, the U.S. forces took over police activities. And while initially there was extensive looting, particularly in Panama City, the majority of Panamanians were happy to see Noriega gone. This is an armored track vehicle. Most of the Panamanians were cooperative. In fact, many were even supportive. of the United States, and this is actually something that was posted by Panamanians. One event of note involved then Air Force Reserve Major Clay T. McCutcheon, who's a friend of mine. He later became Major General, which you can see he is in this picture. And his another gunship captain by the name of Captain Mark Wilson, who also became a Major General later. Their AC-130As were the first gunships airborne out of Howard Air Force Base on the invasion hit night. Their crews suppressed PDF small arms and mortar fires, picked snipers off the roof within 20 feet of American paratroopers near the Marriott Hotel, and provided all kinds of visual support for U.S. forces. For all they did that night, McCutcheon won a medal for what he didn't do. Late during the first night, forward air controllers, those little guys fly in little Piper Cubs and tell you where to shoot your ordnance. The forward air controllers vectored them to an area that had been held by the PDF, but by now was being swept by American ground forces. In short, the Americans were in a kill zone. Realizing that the ground forces could be Americans, McCutcheon disregarded the order to fire and returned to Howard Air Force Base. McCutcheon's commanding officer remarked as he was being debriefed, quote, "Either you will be court-martialed or you'll get a medal pinned on you." Turned out McCutcheon's intuition was correct, and he won the Distinguished Flying Cross. On Christmas Eve, Noriega was cornered in the Vatican Embassy in Panama City, where he received temporary asylum. There ensued a 10-day standoff during which U.S. troops encircled the embassy, and psychological operation units blasted the complex with loud rock and roll music. Noriega finally surrendered on January 3rd, 1990, following assurances that he would not be harmed. There's the combat, and down there he is. He was taken to Miami, where he was tried on 8 counts of drug trafficking, racketeering, and money laundering, as Tom pointed out. On a lighter note, one of the charges against him had to be dropped when what they thought was a 50-kilo bag of cocaine turned out to be nothing more than tamale flour. They had to drop that one. He was convicted and sentenced to 40 years in prison. After serving 15, he was released in September 2007, still facing extradition to both Panama and France for convictions in absentia for murder and money laundering. France was granted the first extradition in April of 2010 by then Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. Noriega arrived in Paris in April of 2010, and after a retrial was found guilty and sentenced to 7 more years in jail. A conditional release was granted in September 2011 for Noriega to now be extradited to Panama to serve 20 years there. He arrived in Panama, it's getting ridiculous. He arrived in Panama in December of 2011 and was immediately put into prison. To quote General McCutcheon, and looking back at the just cause, he said, "It was a busy little war, and it was tougher than many expected, but it was the only war we had." The U.S. reported, finally, in the end, 23 killed in action, 324 wounded, while the Panamanians officially lost 205 killed and 712 captured. Civilian casualty numbers continue to be a matter of controversy since the Pentagon reported 200 civilians killed and 2,500 displaced. Let's see what I got there. Just keep that in your mind. Some human rights groups claimed, however, that 4,000 had died and 15,000 been displaced, most during the structural fires in Panama City. These same groups claimed that the PDF suffered more than 2,000 casualties killed since most of them had been actually shot by U.S. troops after they had surrendered. Recent forensic evidence, however, suggests, and I've seen the reports, that the Panamanian casualty numbers were probably much closer to the Pentagon estimates, and that most U.S. troops, I love how they put this, treated their captives according to the rules of war. That didn't mean they didn't give a rifle butt in the face. It just means they didn't kill them. One compelling fact is that U.S. military and civilian aid groups provided housing, food and clothing, and medicine for about 3,000 people, which would decisively contradict the claim of 15,000 displaced people. On a positive note, Guillermo Endara, who had been in hiding since he had won the 1988 election, was sworn in literally the same night that the invasion took place. On the first anniversary of Just Cause, he called for a national day of reflection. In one case, however, 2,000 Panamanians staged what they called a black march through the streets of Panama City, condemning Just Cause, but more emphatically condemning Endara's economic policies. Now, the point is this. The one positive aspect is that they were not punished or shot or bludgeoned during the protest, which meant democracy was at least beginning to take some seed. In the end, the virtues or faults of Just Cause will be best determined by the people of Panama. As for the American military, it was an operation that, while handled more smoothly than the one in Grenada 7 years earlier, still did not improve such contingency missions to the level that SOCOM had hoped. Even so, the lessons learned from Just Cause provided for much improved joint operational cohesion when the U.S. finally stumbled its way into the first Persian Gulf War. I know you guys are hot and sweating, and I'm done. Okay. All right.
Thank you. We've got some questions on material. Yeah, LeVar Smith.
Yeah, I had a quick question in terms of looking at Panama, in terms of the geopolitics. So some of my doctoral research is actually on Zimbabwe, as Dr. Ayers talked about in Mugabe, and he talked about how when there's economic pressures or external pressures on dictators, they often turn anti-Western. So my question is primarily two parts. What influence did geopolitics have in the region in terms of looking at the declining Soviet threat? Was that an issue in terms of allowing Noriega to kind of move towards anti-U.S. rhetoric, but also the influence of democracy in other parts of Latin America? We're talking about Brazil, we're talking about Argentina. And what are the larger implications of Noriega's removal from power and democracy throughout that region, throughout Central America? That's a lot.
I don't know about blowing up.
Along with a very interesting question. I would think, my own view, the references you made to Argentina and the end of the military rule there, which was earlier. Same with Brazil. Brazil, the military slowly turned over power to civilians. As you know, Pinochet in Chile was so confident that he brought prosperity to the Chileans, they would just vote for him for life, right? Well, he was shocked when they said, see you around. So I tend to think, given communications, that had more influence in Panama than Panama on them. And the reason I say that, again, all this news and everything, that's why Noriega would shut down and control the press and shut down radio and television. As these news stories are coming in or analysis are being made of what's going on elsewhere in Latin America, This isn't exactly what he wants to hear when he's trying to suppress all opposition. So I think that had a greater influence. And on top of it, one that you didn't mention, by the time you get to 1989, the wars to the north, Nicaragua and El Salvador, are over. Basically, they're over. It'd be 1991 before the election took place in Nicaragua. But the peace accords were signed at, what's the name of the beach? The Big Del Monte. Great place on the beach in Honduras. Tell them, if you ever want to get the name of it. Beautiful place on the Caribbean. You get up in the morning and have lobster and eggs for about 5 hours. So go down there and travel on down further south. But for all intents and purposes, that has ended. So I think as Bill alluded to, and I made a brief reference to it, but Panama no longer serves our purpose. So Noriega's, he's talking into a tunnel as far as I'm concerned. He has no audience at home except the officer and the Doberman and the dignity battalions around him. And the people who, you look at these groups, and that's why I emphasize that in talking tonight, the groups are anxious to get rid of them. The elite is forever thinking that they're going to go back to power. And I'm very good friends with Nicaraguan exiles who made their way to Honduras. And I see them, well, I haven't seen them in 2 years now. Well, I should say I saw the son in February. But I go down there quite a bit and see the Yacasa family. And the father, he's still living in the past because he saw the Sandinista revolution until he had to leave. We're going to get rid of Somoza, and the landowners are going to come to power. Well, that wasn't going to happen anyway, but to go further in some kind of analogy here, it's like Cuba. Of the old guard, they're my age, Harold's age, and older, those who left in the 60s. So they're not going back. Well, they may want to go back to visit. I know many Cubans who came after will be the children, Peter Pan and all that stuff, but they go back to visit. Their children are Americanized. What's new in the mall? What movie's playing tonight? Uncle who? He's a long-lost relative. Yeah, we'll talk about him, but they don't have the emotion and the passion. So when you take that and you apply in the long role in terms of geopolitics to Panama, again, I think the influence was from the outside. Now, in the contemporary, since 2000, or even when Valadares was inserted by the United States, if I remember correctly, Bill, we even swore him into office before the invasion took place.
Yes.
But,
Hours before.
yeah, hours before the invasion. Well, he represented the old upper class. And that wasn't what that middle sector wanted or those poor people wanted. See, one of the things that I left out and should mention is that Torrijos organized the urban labor group into a national union. It's kind of a disparate collection of people, but they got a union, and they are vociferous. And Valadares and his economic policies, as Bill said in that protest, he's not reaching out to the people, so they want change. Now, guys like Reuben Blades, the singer, ran for the presidency. I mean, they were searching. And Arias's wife, Moscoso, Maria, she eventually wins the presidency in, 2000, 2004. And she was not a politician. But see, it's the euphoria of what happened. And so again, I think it's the outside influences that affect Panama. And as time passes by, Panama now is confronting its past. That's what it does. It has an election coming on May 5th, I think it is. And the result, the polls that I've seen lately, it's too close to call. But you've got one that's on the left, one representing the party in power, which is corrupt as can be, and guys who clean the whole place up. That song is played before. It's the same tune, as my friend in Honduras, Ernesto, would say something about government. Ernesto, what's new? It's the same circus, new clowns. and that's kind of a harsh statement to make, but he's making it about his country. But you have to wonder if the analogy, even in most Vegas ways, applies. Yeah, don't know. I don't know if that helps or not.
Okay, well, Seems to be unanimous. We appreciate your attendance. I hope you drive a great deal out of this evening's program. Thank you very much. Thank you.